You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and I've got 2 updates for you today, and they're long, so let's get to it. All right. I've been asked by listeners and friends before what case that I've covered has meant the most to me. Well, I can't really answer that because each episode, my heart just breaks for the victims and the victims' families. That's why you sometimes see me include some lighter stories now and again, just to maybe soften the heaviness of this ugly world. But there is one case that I have covered twice since May of last year that has made me lose sleep. It's also made me want to retell the findings to people who aren't even true crime followers. And quite honestly, it's made me want to fly down to Texas and fight alongside the grieving parents. And I'm so sad to tell you that I'm bringing you another update from Uvalde. And in this update, an Austin investigator hired by the city of Uvalde has ripped open any healing wounds that the families and loved ones and even just the residents of Uvalde have experienced. He ripped open those wounds and he poured in some acid with a report that found that no city officers, I'm going to say that again, the report found that no city officers violated the department's policy during the mass shooting attack at Robb Elementary School that left 2 teachers and 19 children dead. And it also wounded 18 others. Okay, guys, I'm angry, and we're like 45 seconds into this story, and I'm going to give you some details, and I'm sure you're going to be angry right along with me. Let's start at the beginning. On May 24th of 2022, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos entered the elementary school that had about 600 kids attending, and those kids ranged in ages from 2nd through 4th grade. Ramos had legally purchased 3 guns, and he entered the school with 375 rounds of ammunition at around 11:30 a.m. that day. That is a key point. 11:30 a.m. that day is when he went in. Before entering the school, he had shot his grandmother, and he had also sent a text message saying, "I shot my grandma." He then told the same friend via text that he was headed to the school. His grandmother lived after being shot in the head, thankfully. Then at 11:29 a.m. that morning, a teacher sees this gunman approaching the school and she calls 911. The gunman focused his efforts in 2 classrooms, room 111 and room 112. At 11:35 a.m., 2 separate groups of police officers enter the building. Now, one of those officers that came in had external armor, and 2 were wearing concealed armor, so they had some form of protection. Now, included in those officers is the chief of school district's police department, Pete Arredondo. He makes the tragic decision at that time of abandoning his radio in the parking lot, and when he enters the school, he now has no communication with the rest of the officers. Just 1 minute later, more officers enter the building. Then 1 minute after that, the gunman fires more shots, and the police officers, they actually retreat erroneously for about 2 more minutes. The chief thinks the classrooms might be empty because room 110 did not have children inside. Okay, I just want to deviate for a second. It's important to note they absolutely knew where the gunman was because Arredondo had gone to 110 and he knew that room 111 and 112 were right there, and that's where the gunshots were happening. All right. There's so much here. The gunman fires more rounds, and the officers have been inside the building 6 full minutes and have listened to gunshot after gunshot, yet they're still hunkered down in the hallway. One officer waiting in the hallway gets a text message from his wife saying she's been shot. Now, see, his wife, she's a teacher at the school. Officers escorted that husband from the scene, but they do nothing to help the woman or the other children who eventually died. By this time, the scene is swarming with personnel. We have Border Patrol outside, 19 officers in a hallway down from the shooter, 19. Department of Public Safety has established a perimeter. Meanwhile, no one has attempted to enter rooms 111 or 112. Other kids are being evacuated through windows of other classrooms throughout the elementary school. And it's now been 35 minutes since the first call to 911. when a DPS agent is insistent that this is a hostage situation and they need to enter the rooms. Unfortunately, he is told they have not received supervisor approval to do so. No command post has been set up either. Basically, no one has stepped up to lead the operation. Now, students who are trapped in the school are calling 911, begging for help, while those officers stand outside the rooms. At 12:17 p.m., this is 48 minutes since the first 911 call, Pete Arredondo begins trying keys in different doors to figure out if he has a master key for room 111 or 112. Now, as you can imagine, the crowd of parents outside has become unmanageable. They are demanding for help and information. Some parents breach the police barrier and they try to break windows to get into the school. At 12:21, the gunman fires more rounds. At 12:32, more than an hour after the first 911 call, the chief is still searching for keys, and officers are just standing outside of the hallway that leads to the rooms where children have been shot. At 12:43, the gunman shoots the classroom door while a child inside the room is secretly communicating with 911. At 12:46, a Border Patrol tactical unit, without the city chief's permission, rush past the waiting officers and they finally enter the rooms. At 12:50, a Border Patrol agent finally kills the gunman. Okay, I give you that much detail before I tell you about the report because we have to understand how much communication was happening and how much time expired before someone did something. Now, my last update about the Uvalde shooting discussed a scathing federal report that found multiple errors in judgment and policy on that May shooting day. But the city decided to do its own investigation, and they hired a private Austin-based investigator named Jesse Prado, who was also a former detective. And he decided to conduct a review of the local response. He was hired in July of 2022. That was less than 2 months after the shooting. And state lawmakers had already conducted a cursory review and stated that the city officers had egregiously poor decision-making during the mass shooting. Now, Prado, that's the guy who did the investigation, he approached the report a little different. He said he figured this report would be used to address pending lawsuits, so everyone he talked with was accompanied by a lawyer. Now, during that investigative time, Prado said he did have difficulty getting information from the city's legal department. And you guys, that's a whole other mess. During that time, the city of Uvalde sued the district attorney because she would not release all the information requested. I think it's fair to say these leaders all the way around do a less than stellar job of working together. Now, Prado's report was presented to the public and to the city council of Uvalde last week in a nearly 2-hour meeting that included public comments. For nearly an hour, Prado discussed the report, saying it found that none of the Uvalde police officers or dispatchers violated department policies on that day when 21 people died. The report did highlight that officers had failed to enter the room and to stop the shooter, but instead waited outside for nearly 80 minutes before a completely different department stepped up and stopped the shooter. So they did admit to that, but his recommendation was that officers should continue to learn how to respond when an active shooter incident is occurring. Prado also concluded that the idea that the door was locked was an idea shared by all responders, so they were doing something by attempting to get a key to unlock the door. And that doing something lasted for about 45 minutes. So basically, he said that they weren't sitting on their hands. They were trying to unlock a door. Okay, it should be noted that the federal report determined the door was never locked. I'm just going to let that sit there for a second. The door was never locked. Now, Prado also said that blame for the events following the shooting should be placed on the district attorney's office and not the police department. Okay, remember how I said none of these people work well together? The mayor of the city several months ago publicly accused the DA's office of orchestrating a cover-up for the law enforcement missteps. So nobody's helping anybody out. One of the biggest highlights of the 600-page federal report, the one that came out earlier, was that the fact no command post was ever established left no one making decisions while children were dying. That report, the 600-page one, it cataloged a sweeping array of training and communication and leadership and technology problems. Yet Prado's report said those problems existed, but the police officers could not be blamed for those problems since healthy policies had not been established. Now, the Justice Department federal report stated that 48 minutes after the shooter entered the school, Uvalde acting police chief Mariano Pargas continued to provide no direction, command, or control to personnel. But in the new report by Prado, it is stated that Pargas, despite being the police chief, was not the go-to guy on that day. The report said it was the school police chief, Arredondo, who was in charge because the school is within UCISD's jurisdiction. Now, Chief Pargas retired after his interview with Pardo several months ago. But the investigator said, it would be my recommendation and my team's recommendation to exonerate Lieutenant Pargas. So he feels that the police chief had no responsibility in the lack of a command post or in the training or in the policy crafting. And also, in the report, Prado blamed parents for part of the missteps that day. He said that at times the parents were difficult to control outside of the school and that their attempts to break through the police barricade slowed the process and impeded the ability to enter the classrooms. You guys, I just can't with this guy. I don't give opinion here very often because I approach this podcast bringing you like the latest crime news and updates to older cases. But I've got to here. I mean, really, 19 city police officers were standing in the school and terrified parents outside of the school stopped those 19 from entering and doing the right thing. 19 officers who listened to a gunman continue to fire rounds in a classroom filled with 9 and 10 and 11-year-old innocent children, yet terrified parents were part of the problem. Well, during the meeting, parents were becoming agitated with the findings, and they were also anxious to give comments. The meeting is available on YouTube if you want to watch it. I'll just warn you, it's lengthy. But here's a weird thing that did happen in the meeting. After Prado gave his findings from his report, he was dismissed from the meeting. He left. And the parents weren't having that. So before the comments section, a city worker went and retrieved Prado, and he returned to listen to what parents had to say. Now, the families, they had several issues, obviously. And I've pulled a couple of clips from the meeting where parents gave responses to Prado's report. And you guys are going to be able to hear the desperation in their voices, the anger that they still feel, and the resentment that they have that people have kept their jobs while their children died. Now, I'm going to play these 3 different people back to back. So you're going to hear 3 different parents, 2 mothers and a father. And I want to warn you about the dad. He does use some cuss words, so maybe if you have younger kids and that worries you, just proceed with caution.
How dare you? There were multiple law enforcement officers from multiple agencies that stood by for 77 minutes as children and teachers died, and I'm not going to stand by. There are a number of people that I would like to discuss, but today I planned on discussing 3 people. 3 people who had the opportunity to go in 11:37. Before then, before 11:55, when you said, Pete Arredondo said, wait for the keys or wait to evacuate rooms. 3 officers went towards gunfire. They knew what to do. They did that in the beginning. They went toward the gunfire, and then they retreated. Canales and Landry and Javi Martinez at the time were members of the department's SWAT team. They had active shooter training, and they knew what to do. They chose their lives over the lives of children and teachers, and there is no policy change will eliminate their fear and their hesitation to do what is right in the positions they serve, and for that they should be terminated. We keep getting kicked while we're already down. It's just blow after blow, and all I heard today was it's the school's fault. It was some of the training instructors. Well, it's because y'all don't serve them, so you're fine saying it's their fault. What you're not fine saying is that it's y'all's fault.
How do all of you live with yourselves? How do you go to bed at night and then wake up every day? Shame on y'all. You said that they did it in good faith. You call that good faith? They stood there 77 minutes and waited. After they got call after call, that kids were still alive in there. All this is, it's a pact. It's a brother's pact. You protect your own. Well, you know what? We're going to stand here and we're going to keep fighting for our own because nobody else is going to do it. And you're not going to stop us.
This child was shot. And he sat in there for 77 minutes while those fucking cowards did nothing. You said that that was in good faith. And I'm going to reiterate that point. Good faith. Good faith is 77 minutes. The true heroes are those that passed. Those teachers. The survivors are heroes. And I am standing here before all of y'all because my son was murdered. He is standing here before you because he was shot. He has more balls than this whole damn town. Every police in this son of a bitch, he does. So I want y'all to look at him. Look at him. Because Mariano Pargas won't. These other police, they won't. Y'all are in charge. You're in charge. And if you follow the recommendations what did he recommend? Oh, it wasn't our fault. Blame it on everybody else. Y'all been doing that. Y'all been doing that for 2 years. We are sick of it. We are sick of it. Justice. When is enough enough? When is the money not worth more than our children's lives? Actually, answer this. Because we pretty much hear y'all every time that y'all get up and speak or do anything like that, y'all are proverbially saying, F our kids.
Okay, you guys, you know how I said this case has stuck with me? It's those parents. That's why this case has stuck with me. Each year when my kids were young, me and my kids, we'd go over how to handle maybe an active shooter incident or even a disaster if it was going to happen at their school. And this exercise of talking about it with them, it kind of changed and evolved as they got older, obviously, because they could handle more information. And also as we learned information from other school shootings or other times of disaster, and then we learned from those. Well, I was fearful I was going to be one of those parents. That's why I had those conversations with my kids. And now those parents, they've just been let down yet again. So you're probably asking, what did the city council members do? Well, some of them just sat there silently, but some outright rejected the report. Hector Luvano said he was embarrassed and insulted that those findings had been presented. He said the families deserved more and that the community deserved more. One father who addressed the city council didn't just give up and give public comments, but actually addressed the city council and Prado. Well, he was really frustrated about their silence. Here's what he had to say.
Did you think that was going to work out? Do you think that's going to bring people together? Any of y'all? Was that a good idea? Is it working out how y'all wanted it to?
It's not working out at all.
Can y'all answer some questions then?
Answer questions. I have no idea why you can't answer questions. I think you should answer questions.
So, why can't you answer any questions? Why can't he answer any questions? He answered your questions. Just advise him not to answer if it's wrong. This is a setup. You know what McLaughlin said? He said there's a cover-up, right? He said there's a cover-up. So was it a cover-up? Was he lying? Was he lying? Right? He said there's a cover-up. That's what this looks like right now. Are y'all going to be part of that? Are y'all going to be a disgrace? Or are you going to make Uvalde proud? No answers. We sit here, we talk. No answers whatsoever. Well, what's the point of that? That's not going to bring Uvalde together. You have to join the families. You have to join them.
All right, you guys, it's unclear what effect the report will have on a criminal investigation that's underway by the Uvalde District Attorney's Office. And remember, the office has been accused by the mayor of orchestrating a cover-up, so I'm sure that doesn't bring much peace to these parents. And a grand jury was convened, but so far, no officers have faced criminal charges. At least 5 officers who were on the scene that day, well, they've lost their jobs. And those 5 included 2 State Department of Public Safety officers and also the Uvalde School Police Chief Pete Arredondo, because he failed to take command of the situation, even though a protocol for school shootings that he wrote himself called for him to do so. Now, I can't leave this update without at least mentioning the names of those who died in the Robb Elementary shooting. I want to make a point here. I don't speak Spanish. And if I mispronounce any name here, please know that it isn't intentional and that I do this to bring love for those who have died. Here's the people who died that day. Uzziah Garcia, age 9. Xavier Javier Lopez, age 10. Jose Flores, age 10. Miranda Mathis, age 11. Eva Morales, age 44. Ellie Garcia, age 10. Tess Mata, age 10. Elijah Cruz Torres, age 10. Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, age 10. Irma Garcia, 48 years old. Nevaeh Bravo, age 10. McKenna Elrod, age 10. Matei Rodriguez, age 10. Alethea Ramirez, age 10. Jace Carmelo Luvanos, age 10. Hyla Nicole Siglero, age 11. Rogelio Torres, age 10. Alexandria Lexi Anaya Rubio, age 10. Ameri Jo Garza, age 10. Jackie Cazares, age 10. Layla Salazar, age 10. Also, the police officer, Joe Garcia, he was the guy who was escorted from the scene while officers stood in the hallway. And remember, they had him leave because his wife had been shot in the classroom and sent a text message. Well, he died 2 days after the shooting from a heart attack. Of course, I will let you know if any criminal charges are ever brought in this case. All right, you guys, I have another case update for you. And this one, oh my gosh, it's such a lengthy story. And I'm going to do my best to summarize the tragic life of Chris Tapp. But if you really want to know this case, you need to go back to the November 20th episode of Rise in Crime to get all of the details about his wrongful conviction and also the tragic events that plagued his life since being released from prison. But I'm going to give you a real quick summary here. In June of 1996, 18-year-old Angie Dodge was raped and murdered in her Idaho Falls, Idaho home. Now, during the early months of the investigation, 20-year-old Chris Tapp was linked to a group of young people that used to hang out with Angie on the banks of the Snake River. After over 100 hours of intense police interrogation, Chris confessed to aiding in the murder, although no physical evidence linked him to the murder. Tapes of the interrogation show detectives feeding Chris information and manipulating him into believing that they cared about him and also coercing him into acceptance for his role in the crime, which we now know was nothing. He had no role. He also had no lawyer present. Chris was convicted of aiding and abetting in the rape and murder of Angie Dodge, and he was sentenced to a minimum 30 years in prison. Now, Chris eventually recanted his confessions. And in 2007, after much activism by Angie's mother, Carol, who was working to free Chris from prison, well, that's when the Innocence Project took up the case. And you heard me right. It's the victim's mother who's working with the Innocence Project because she's sure the police had forced Chris into a confession and she wanted the real rapist and killer found. Well, after 20 years in prison, the appeals process successfully removed the rape conviction from Chris's record since his DNA was not a match to the semen deposit at the scene of the brutal murder. And by this time, Chris had served over 20 years in prison and he was released, but his murder charge was not removed. However, in July of 2019, Chris was exonerated completely after a man named Brian Drips was arrested for the rape and murder of Angie. Now, his DNA matched the sample from the scene, and he was tracked down using a familial DNA database like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. Now, this is the same method that was later used to discover the Golden State Killer. After being released from prison, Chris sued the city of Idaho Falls, and that suit was settled for $11.4 million. But the tragedy continued to follow Chris. He had married after his release from prison, but his estranged wife, Stacy, was killed in a single-car rollover accident in Idaho Falls in the summer of 2023. Then on November 5th of last year, Chris died in a Las Vegas hospital from what was reported as a slip and fall accident at a luxury hotel. Now, Dateline had reported at that time that Chris was in Vegas for a car show and that he had slipped and hit his head on a coffee table. Okay, that's where I left you with this story back in November. But last week, a man was arrested and charged with the murder of Chris Tapp. Now, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department arrested 45-year-old Daniel Rodemer for the murder of Chris, which they say occurred during an altercation at a Halloween party at the hotel. Now, this party, held in one of the higher-end suites, was attended by Chris and also a Formula One race car driver that hasn't been identified, and then also several social media influencers, and of course, Daniel Rodemer and his stepdaughter were there as well. Now, I wasn't familiar with Daniel, but he is a former athlete who rose to marginal fame as a contestant in the 2004 Tough Enough competition. He also worked at WWE's Deep South Wrestling. He then went on to run for Nevada's 3rd U.S. Congressional District as a Republican in 2020. He lost his campaign race to the incumbent, but then moved to Texas and announced he would be running in a special election race there for the U.S. 6th District. He lost that race as well. Now, during both races, he was hampered by old allegations stemming from bar fights and 911 calls made by his then girlfriend. She had alleged theft and domestic violence in those confrontations. Okay, that woman, well, she went on to become his wife, and she also went on to claim there was no violence in their household. So he's married, and he has 6 kids, and he's at a Halloween party with his stepdaughter in a suite at Resorts World with Chris Tapp. Now, Daniel attended the party shirtless and in a fur coat. Kind of think of the gross and misogynistic Ken doll from the Barbie movie. That's who he was dressed up as. And according to a police affidavit, when Daniel showed up with his stepdaughter to the party, he had told people she was hands off and that they shouldn't offer her any of the drugs that were available there. According to the documents, Chris did not heed the warning. He offered the stepdaughter cocaine or some other drug, and Daniel lost his cool. That's when he followed Chris into a bathroom that had a table set up with various drugs available to partygoers, like cocaine and stuff, and there was also a $100 bill on the table. Well, he follows him into that bathroom, and witnesses heard Daniel tell Chris, "If you ever talk to my daughter again, I'll effing kill you." Then there were 2 loud bangs, and witnesses said the noises accompanied Daniel hitting Chris. In the affidavit, the beating was described as Daniel knocking Chris to the ground with several punches. While Chris was falling, the witness said he hit a table with his head. The witness also said Chris did not fight back while Daniel continued to punch Chris in his head and body. After beating Chris in the bathroom, one of the partygoers sent a text to a person, maybe a male, maybe a female. I might be leading female here, but that would be me speculating. We don't know. The police affidavit doesn't say who it is. But somebody sent a text to another person who was actually in the hotel, but not in the suite. That text said, Dan got really mad and punched Chris. When that person rushed to the room, that person found Chris on the bed with a swollen face and a large mark on the side of his neck. Now, Chris was not speaking or responding to people who were surrounding the bed. And no one in the room or who had witnessed the beating had yet to call the police or medical personnel. So the witness, the one who just arrived, well, that person insisted that someone be called. Now, security from the hotel arrived before EMS, and that security guard told police that he could not get Chris to respond to any commands. Now, according to the witness, the new one in the hotel room, Chris did not receive any medical attention for about 30 minutes following the altercation. And Chris went on to Sunrise Medical, where he died 5 days later from his injuries. That's pretty, there's a lot of details there, but I want to talk to you about something first. I just need to be honest with you guys. I was so skeptical about Chris's death when I brought you that Rise in Crime episode in November of last year. But I truly try to just bring you the current facts and not dive in any rabbit holes or make speculation that can't be proven. But my gut was telling me this whole thing was wrong. First off, back in Idaho where I live, everyone knows who Chris Tapp is. Everyone. And the fact that an accident wasn't reported to anyone in Idaho for days is just weird. If it was truly an accident, I believe we would have known much sooner and people would have been rallying around Chris. But it extends past Idaho. Chris has been featured on numerous Dateline episodes. They even just did an update a few weeks ago talking about the homicide investigation. So people know who Chris Tapp is. Also, the story had varied in those first weeks because at one point the story was he was outside of the hotel, but then the story changed that he was inside of the hotel. All of it was so weird, and the details that were being provided just weren't checking out. Now, in the subsequent investigation into Daniel, it showed text messages between him and a woman named Sarah. Okay, her last name was not provided in the affidavit, but Daniel's wife's name is Sarah, so you can put 2 and 2 together. Those messages occurred just hours after the event. In the messages, she questioned Daniel about spousal support, and then she calls him a monster. She then writes the following: I watched you nearly murder somebody, and I had to take your effing hands off from his neck as he laid there, and you ran away. And I spent the next 2 hours trying to take care of him. Nobody should have to watch their husband murder somebody. Okay, I still have some questions. Her timeline, Sarah's timeline, and the witnesses' timelines don't match. But that could be for one obvious reason. People were using drugs. That will impair what you can recall. So, and I don't even know who in that room had drugs on board, but it might change their stories. And then another obvious reason, she's probably had zero sleep when she sent those text messages. And she's probably overwhelmed with emotion and she's just spewing her thoughts. Now, it's also never been clearly reported that she was actually at the party. Yet the text kind of declares that she was there and had to take his hands off of Chris's neck. But then I was thinking she might potentially be the person who was texted who came in and said, we have to call EMS. I'm not really sure. And until, the criminal phase of this plays out, we're probably not going to know. That's when we're going to find out more details. Now, there is some things left still that I can report. It is important to understand that the autopsy found that Chris died from the effects of blunt force trauma due to a physical altercation. Now, the autopsy also states that Chris was unattended to for an hour following the altercation. So again, we have timeline discrepancies. Chris was also found to have multiple brain bleeds, and his toxicology was positive for cocaine, alcohol, and marijuana. Daniel voluntarily surrendered to authorities and immediately posted a $200,000 bail. He is set to return to court on April 10th. Now, the tragedy of Chris Tapp's life is heartbreaking and head-shaking. I'll bring you updates when I have them. Well, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. You guys have really pulled through for me. So many of you have given a rating and a review. Thank you so much if you did. And if you haven't yet, please do so. It helps Oh No Media grow. Also, subscribe or give this video, if you're watching on YouTube, a thumbs up. And please share all the Oh No Media podcasts with a friend. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.